Hello everyone. Today I am going to talk about a topic that has been plaguing our world for decades, climate change. Climate change is a global phenomenon that is causing changes in our environment at an unprecedented rate. Rising sea levels, melting glaciers, and more extreme weather conditions are just some of the visible impacts of the climate change. But what many fail to recognize is the interactions between the climate change and the social justice. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is also a social justice issue. The impacts of the climate change are not equally distributed. People who are already vulnerable due to their race, gender, socioeconomic status, or location are the most impacted by the climate change. The marginalized and impoverished communities are often the first ones to experience the devastating effects of climate change. For example, in many developing countries, people rely on agriculture as their primary source of income. Climate change induced drought and floods can wipe out entire crops and livelihoods, lively farming with no income to support their families. Additionally, many marginalized communities are often situated in low-lying areas or near coastline, making them particularly vulnerable to the effects of rising sea level and storms. The impacts of the climate change also exacerbate existing social and economic inequalities. For example, studies shows that the people of color and low income communities are more likely to live near polluting industries such as power plants and factories, which emit greenhouse gases and worsen the impacts of climate change. These communities are also less likely to have access to resources such as healthcare and emergency services that are needed in the event of a natural disaster. Furthermore, the action that we take to address climate change can also have social justice implications. For example, transitioning to clean energy source can result in a job losses in industries such as coal mining. It is important that we ensure that those who are most impacted by these transitions are not left behind and are provided with the training and support to transition to new industries. So, what can we do to address the interaction of climate change and social justice? Firstly, we need to recognize that climate change is a social justice issue. We need to acknowledge that the impacts of the climate change are not equally distributed and that marginalized communities are the most vulnerable. We need to prioritize the needs of these communities in our response to climate change. Now, secondly, we need to ensure that the marginalized communities are included in decision-making processes. This includes involving them in the development of the climate policies and providing them with the resources and tools they need to adapt the impacts of the climate change. This will require a concerted effort to build trust and engage with communities that have historically been excluded from decision-making processes. Thirdly, we need to address the root cause of social and economic inequalities. This means tackling issues such as poverty, racism, and discrimination that contributed these inequalities. By addressing these underlying issues, we can reduce the vulnerability marginalized communities to impacts of climate change. Finally, we need to ensure that our response to climate change is equitable. This means ensuring that the burden of addressing climate change is not disproportionately placed on the most vulnerable communities. It also means providing support and resources to help these communities transition to new industries and adapt to the impacts of the climate change. So, in conclusion, climate change and social justice are inextricably linked, and the impacts of the climate change are not equally distributed, and marginalized communities are most vulnerable. Addressing the intersection of climate change and social justice requires a concerted efforts to prioritize the needs of these communities, involve them in decision making processes, addressing underlying inequalities, and ensure that our response to climate change is equitable. We must work together to ensure that we create a future that is just and sustainable for all. Thank you for watching.